to then attack their political opponents instead of actually talking about the genocide on its own terms alongside all these other issues that we also need to be talking about. They're all important.
Right.
And certainly the genocide is one of the most, if not the most pressing issue that we need to be discussing. And I do not want to downplay that, but you don't get to use it as a cudgel to set other people against each other. Again,
And it's not just the genocide of the Palestinians. Trans genocide is a thing. And then there's also systemic racism, which it's kind of semantics at that point, right? When the school to prison pipeline and the exception clause with the 13th Amendment and the exploitation of people of color in red line neighborhoods, police violence, it's like potato at that point. So there's these things that are comparable to genocide in the continuation of rape culture, manifest destiny, and the exploitation of all peoples on Turtle Island. It's and elsewhere around the world. Like that kind of ranking and division is just that. It's division. It's betrayal. It's something that gets in the way of us unifying and fighting together against the ruling class. And the people that lead the charge as far as that division goes commonly are white straight men with beards.
constantly. And again, it's why I get disillusioned. It's why I, at the end of the day, I just been, being frank, just been struggling.
No, I get it. I see you, because I have days where I lose heart, especially with the climate catastrophe, state shift, various things that affect people that I love and care about elsewhere in the world that I have a deep connection with, that it's difficult for me to find a way of imagining that we'll be able to see each other because of climate change, but also fascism walking arm in arm with that, because capital neoliberalism is in crisis. It's always in crisis, but it's decaying, and it's set to decay. And it's easy to feel disillusioned. But I love fighting. I love helping people. And I do that from a position of privilege. And no matter how many people tell me that I'm crazy, that I'm fun to point fingers at and laugh at, I'll still do it because I love having friends. I love helping people. And I love standing up against bullies.
I don't need you to just go dis-a-fucking-peer. I would, there's some people I would, like Trump and folks, to just go disappear in the fucking sun. I hope Mitch McConnell's fucking dead, by the way. That's an aside. Waiting for that announcement any fucking day now. But, at the end of the day, it's not useful to me. What I want people to do is fucking grow up, be uncomfortable, and be okay with being uncomfortable, introspect, and learn and try to grow.
Yeah, exactly. As a Gothicist, living within confusion as a state that is all around us because of capital operating as normal, we have to be able to navigate, as you call it, fracture points, stress points, to identify where there's smoke, where there's fire, and be able to work accordingly. You have to acclimate to chaos, to long and hard is the way that out of hell leads up to light. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. Again, you have to become comfortable with the idea that the state will see you as an enemy, because otherwise nothing will ever get done.
I try to do that. I have not been perfect at that. There are times where I've fucked up. And unfortunately, I can't always talk about that on this channel, just because, again, our culture needs you to be strongman fucking things, and trans women like myself never get any fucking grace to make those mistakes. But I do try to, when I fuck up, learn and grow and try to show that I've done better in future works. I try my best to do it. And I get very angry with people being unwilling to do that for me and for other folks.
And frankly, I enjoy this side of you. I enjoy the work that you're doing that is showing a side of you that's honestly pissed off. And I understand why you may have, up until this point, held back a little bit, insofar as, well, you want to be nice. You want to be able to please everyone and say things in such a way that you don't get harassed constantly. I fawn from abuse myself, and being on the receiving end of that, both the abuse But the fact they're like, why are you saying sorry? Or did you do something wrong? And I finally realized that no, I have to just do what I'm going to do. The Gorgon doesn't give herself a haircut. She uses her snakes to get the job done. And I'm really liking your new hairdo as far as that goes. It's very refreshing. Hi, everyone. Today I wanted to respond to Jessie Gender's After Dark, specifically their video, The Graham Platner Allegations Have Leftist Men Telling on Themselves. And this video, I started watching it and responded at the time that I very much appreciated what Jessie was doing. They were talking about the situation as a rape survivor themselves and being angry at people upholding patriarchy to apologize for rape by giving men like Graham Platner relative advantage over others by virtue of the privilege that he has, essentially apologizing for him repeatedly over and over and over in ways that expose a facet of capital patriarchy that maintains the usual divides that are at play. And there are different things that you could say about that, insofar as people only drew a line in the sand once a white woman was raped, versus, say, all of the other crimes that happened overseas that didn't get in the way of establishment politics. But it bears repeating that Jessie's video yields a perspective that I think is important. Speaking as a fellow rape survivor myself, one of the hardest things that we come up against when talking about the abuse that we endure is not the initial event unto itself, or at least not by itself, but rather the silencing of us as victims and survivors afterwards. And much of that comes from men who essentially talk over us and, while doing so, apologize for rapists in ways that are obvious enough right out the gate, but then once the evidence becomes impossible to ignore, they act like they didn't do anything wrong, period. So I started watching Jesse's video and thought to myself, I totally agree with them and see where they're coming from because we're in the same position. We're both trans women. We're both survivors of abuse, and we have a similar class position as well. We both write from privilege, but that doesn't change the fact that we still are trying to combat patriarchy as a larger part of capitalism and the predations that it causes at home and abroad through imperialism. And in order for that imperialism to continue, people have to apologize for rape. So that's basically what this video is about. As I'm responding to Jessie, I will be keeping all of those things in mind as I give my own commentary based on what they say. So we'll be doing that. And as we're doing that, I will also go over my own work briefly, supplying context insofar as what is my work about? What does it do? And giving an example of some writing or research that I'm doing critiquing men similar to Hassan Piker and Kyle Kalinske, defending Graham Platner to a degree. There is a shared performance among bad actors who enjoy the same privilege to uphold the same abuses. So I have someone at the end that relates to this situation in ways that essentially speak to hypocrisy. It's the subject of Jesse's video. It's the subject of my work, this video or otherwise, which will contain a bit of writing at the end tied to a previous video where I was reading some writing that I was doing on the Tabernacle and his hypocrisy. So there's no shortage of white straight guys with beards. Specifically, this piece, White Straight Guys with Beards or Western Marxism and its flaws, transphobia, and other bigotries in the anti-Zionist movement. I've already read this piece, but specifically there's a bit at the end I wrote Afterthoughts, or Heroines and Villains, a Gothic approach to intersectionality while exposing state predation, that I think is quite germane to what Jessie's talking about, which is exposing hypocrisy that upholds predation through the usual patriarchal values that capital relies on to continue preying as usual. And there are various buttings of heads that happen according to class privilege, culture, race, and various other things. So our focus here is patriarchy. Our focus here is what's happening between these people and ourselves, where we try and speak out through the trauma that we know and from the privilege that we have to be able to speak out in ways that are often met with people attacking us. So, keeping all of that in mind, I'm going to lead off with the initial comment that I gave to Jessie. I'll talk about the work that I do very briefly, giving a couple of examples, and then we'll respond to Jessie's video, essentially a commentary track, and then at the end I will read my piece about the Tabernacle and exposing Gothic villains the way that a Gothic heroine classically does, while inside the house is occupied by bad actors. So, first and foremost, I started watching Jessie's video and I got about 3 or 4 minutes into it before they say, at some point therein, that they were a survivor of rape, which led me to empathize with them and their plight. Both of us being white, trans, middle-class women, I say to them, "Thank you for talking about this, Jessie. I've been trying to talk about this myself as a rape survivor, only to have other people tell me to be quiet, essentially that I have privilege and to know my place, etc. Being a rape survivor is never easy, but especially when our voices are downplayed by others who treat us like we're overreacting, making things up or otherwise trying to make trouble. That's bad enough when it comes from overt reactionaries marketing as conservative, but it's even worse when coming from progressively and ostensibly socialist circles who react in similar ways despite saying equal rights for all on the tin. Those double standards really come up insofar as rape discussions are approached online, not just by straight men even, though often them, to be fair, but also by women and racial minorities who darvo my oppression into privilege, ranking my rape with theirs, when all I want to do is say, rape is bad. It's disheartening. All the hugs." So that's the comment that I said initially, and what inspired me to actually say something a bit more was because I didn't get a response here, but I did get a response on Blue Sky, where I sent basically a short message tagging Jessie, letting them know, look, this kind of thing sucks. I know what you're going through. I've experienced it myself, and it ties to the same work that you and I do. And I got, for me anyways, a relatively large response. And I thought, okay, maybe people actually want to hear what I have to say. Keeping that in mind, everything that I'm saying has to do with the work that I do. So, I'll be reading White Straight Guys with Beards in a bit, specifically the afterthoughts about Gothic heroines and villains exposing predation through intersectionality regarding state vampirism. And this has to do with the book series that I have written alongside other people, including my partner Bay Ryan from New Zealand, while acknowledging state vampirism or feeding through the state meta-objection, be it openly capitalist or Marxist-Leninist, to have what I call the horror's revenge, to break the profit and productivity motive by making a world for which it and rape are no longer possible using these methods, i.e. by using the same demonic and slutty language capital does, but at cross purposes. Rape, for me, coming from my definition, to disempower someone or somewhere, a person, culture, or place, in order to harm them, generally through fetishizing and alienizing acts or circumstances, socio-material conditions that target the mind, body and or spirit. Rape can be of the mind, spirit, body and or culture, the land or things tied to it during genocide, etc. It can be individual and or on a mass scale. We'll touch on that more specifically after I respond to Jessie, specifically when I read Afterthoughts or Heroines and Villains, a Gothic approach to intersectionality when exposing state predation. This is tied to a larger piece that talks about white straight guys with beards, R.E. Graham Platner, but also people who either defend him, such as Hassan Piker, Kyle Kolinsky, etc., but also people who might say Graham Platner's bad, but we're going to defend other assholes with beards, notably the Cavernacle, who defends bad empanada. So there's various things going on, and different things hang in the balance, namely the rights of women, but also racial minorities at home and overseas, the Palestinians overseas, and Black people and indigenous people in America, among others, immigrants more broadly that are being targeted by ICE, for instance. So there's a lot of different things going on. What it boils down to, who's full of shit and who's not? Who's a bad actor serving capital and state predation and who's not? And the common thread where those things divide is white straight guys with beards. Are they good actors or not? That's what we'll be focusing on. But even as I do that, I want you to remember that my work focuses not on guys with beards, first and foremost, but on the rights of women. That includes Jessie Gender, of course, and myself, but also sex workers more broadly. When I say the whore's revenge, despite the fact that capitalism sexualizes everything, I'm referring or focusing on primarily sex work, myself, care workers. If the universal class subject is white, straight, and male, according to the state as white, straight, and male, Cartesian, heteronormative, settler, colonial, European, etc., then the voices that we're trying to raise include people with racial privilege, it would seem, right? Women are commonly white. There's a lot of white women in the world, but they are often alienized and fetishized in different ways that discount their voice, where they want to talk about being abused so they can empathize with oppressed parties, and they find themselves being blamed for capitalism. Oh, you whores have it easy. You're degenerate. You're decadent. And an example of that, for instance, is Amanita Doutka, a Scottish non-binary MILF who does sex work and who I interview regarding sex work as a part of a larger struggle. So I'm not going to read this now, but it's just something for you to keep in mind when we're making the world a better place, one where rape is impossible and bad actors are exposed for the liars they are in service to capital, despite playing the hero and the victim, specifically our heroes saying, oh, well, we're going to protect you, right? It's the same old trope. And it plays out in different ways because you have different white straight guys with beards who are doing this kind of thing, from these dudes to this guy to others besides. There's a lot of different examples. And generally speaking, it's homophobic, it's transphobic more broadly through socialism, which these are all progressively minded people, supposedly on the surface. They say, hey, we're good actors. We have your best interests at heart. But then when it comes time to do something really easy, which is denounce rape, they get kind of wishy-washy about it. Platner, for instance, insists that the victim is lying. Hassan plays dumb, as does Kyle Kolinsky. So there's a lot of typical behaviors from white straight guys in particular that extend to token actors, which we'll get to when we talk about the Cavernacle being Irish, for instance. So that's my work and what it's about, which is preventing rape by exposing bad actors. And what we'll be doing now is responding to Jessie Gender's video. I've seen bits and pieces of it, namely the start, but I decided that I actually wanted to respond to it and give my extended thoughts. So that's what we're doing here. I normally do commentary tracks. That's kind of the format that I've been leaning into, where I play the video at a lower volume and then I talk over it. But it feels kind of weird to talk over a fellow rape survivor while they're expressing themselves. So I will be watching this and I will be pausing every so often to respond. So it will be a call and response as opposed to me talking over them. But I do insist that you watch Jessie's video in its entirety. I'll leave a description in the video itself. Lastly, before I start watching, I want to remind people that while Jessie and I have a lot in common, we're not identical. We have our own unique sets of experiences. Our position as middle class trans white women is basically the same in terms of the simple coordinates, but idiosyncratically, we've led our own lives. Our politics are slightly different, even if we have the same basic goal, I would imagine. I'm more radical than Jessie. I would just go out on a limb and say, and I have critiqued them in the past before, but in this specific issue, I absolutely agree with them 100%. It would be very strange for me not to, given the work that I do. So keeping all of that in mind, let's get started.
Hey there, interwebs. Before we get started, I want to give a quick content warning that I am going to be openly discussing topics of sexual assault and rape in this video, in particular the allegations against Graham Platner. So if that is something that is going to be difficult for you to handle, and as a victim of sexual assault myself, it is difficult for me to discuss as well, I completely understand. Please take care of yourselves, and I will see you on the next video. As probably most of you have heard by now, there have been recently some very credible allegations of sexual assault and rape leveled against Graham Platner, who is running for political office in Maine. And I am not in this video going to be going over the nitty-gritty of the details of those allegations. You can check out the reporting by Politico and other outlets. I'll put them in the down below for you to go check out if you are curious about the specifics. But this video in particular is me expressing my anger and frustration at the ways in which these allegations have been discussed within, for lack of a better overriding phrase, the online leftist discourse sphere, because it is evident of not only the ways in which women are constantly dismissed, downplayed, and spoken over, even within supposedly progressive spaces, but also touches upon something that has been my biggest frustration.
Before I let them continue, I do want to weigh in that women aren't the only victims of rape within patriarchy. There's also trans men, non-binary people. In short, people who are feminized within the patriarchal model to be dominated the way that women historically are from ancient Athens onwards within the nuclear model tied to capital. So it's not just women, but victims of abuse, those treated like women more broadly.
And point of anger and source of disillusionment when it comes to being an online figure discussing progressive politics here within YouTube and other places, and how it has really just angered and frustrated me, and again, disillusioned me over the last years, not with the left or anything like that, or the left is like a political project, but our ability to have adult and meaningful and open conversations
In good faith where, hey, this is happening. We should be able to discuss it and talk about it in a way that leads to the prevention of harm. And as someone who works very hard every day with people, women or otherwise, those treated like women, sex workers, first and foremost, being my focus, trying to prevent harm and abuse on the daily with those people by working with them and broadcasting their opinions and desires, thoughts, feelings, experiences. it is incredibly discouraging to realize that you live in a space that does not punish sexual abuse, does not punish rape more broadly as an abuse of power, because rape is about power. First and foremost, you can rape the mind, you can rape the land. Often it is sexualized according to the Cartesian model, where nature versus society, Patel and Moore. Nature is gynecological from the outset, treating things like women in pursuit of developing the land to exploit it. And basically, the benefits outweigh the costs of developing this or that. And the victims commonly are women, including, yes, white women can be victims too. Even when you have privilege, you can still be raped. Sorry to say, read a Gothic novel. The reality of women is that we are still to this day expected to be seen, not heard. And I agree 100% with Jessie, as a fellow trans woman, as having a similar degree of privilege, though maybe not the same degree of exposure on YouTube anyways. I do most of my work off of YouTube. I completely understand where they're coming from. It is frustrating.
About these topics in ways that do not belittle, do not look down upon or speak over women and trans people and other marginalized folks within a progressive space. And it has been something that has been, frankly, the biggest point of pain and hurt for me over the past few years on a personal level, and seeing it play out again and again and again over.
Rape is not just the initial event, but everything that comes after when you're not believed, when you're essentially blamed for what happened to you by testifying to something that goes against the profit motive. It's a form of gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, essentially. Rape survivors are whistleblowers, especially if they talk about what they did. Just the fact that they're alive at all is a form of testimony that will be blamed. But if they come out and talk about it in ways that interfere with business as usual, they will be punished.
And over again, culminating, at least right now, with everything going on with Graham Platner, just left me so angry that I need to express it. And I want to say, like I said, I've tried recording this video a few times now, and it has been difficult for me to kind of keep on task because of how angry this makes me. So I do want to apologize right up front that if this video gets a little bit more rambly than even I typically do in my videos, I apologize for that. But I just really want and need to express this because it is deeply angering me.
Preaching to the choir.
To get into it, to start with Graham Platner. When a few days ago, the allegations, the first allegations against Graham Platner came out from one Lindsay Fitfield in the New York Times, and fuck the New York Times particularly. I don't particularly like them as an outlet for numerous reasons that are quite obvious if you've heard me talk about trans issues elsewhere. But when...
And Zionism, like they're an imperialist paper that upholds the status quo through the persecution of Palestinians. So, and I'm only mentioning that because I want people to recognize that the raping of women at home, trans or otherwise, coincides with the abusing of the Palestinians, who can also be trans, in ways that the New York Times has upheld. So it's possible to hate them for multiple reasons, and I'm sure that Jessie does. Not trying to put words in their mouth or anything, just pointing that out.
Those first allegations from her came out, I would say shocked, but not shocked at the ways in which so many leftist pundits were quickly ready to dismiss or downplay what she was saying as bitch be lying.
Never a good look. The odds of a person who is coming forward with rape accusations, lying, especially women, but really anyone, is very low, because the consequences that you face are incredibly steep. It invites public scrutiny, and you basically put yourself in a situation to be pilloried and ridiculed in ways that will never end, especially in a larger public case like this, let alone the work that I do, which tends to be kind of shoved to the margins, given that I talk about sex workers and their rights in ways that are difficult to advertise. But entering like a public sphere and talking about this in ways that interrupt business as usual, you will get blamed.
Using the excuse that she has ties to the Republican Party. Because she was a conservative and had done work for the Republican Party, so many people were quick to be like, well, she must be lying.
Yeah, that's like super awful. Like Republican women can get raped. Like so for people to say, well, she must be lying because she's a Republican, it's like they're willing to turn a blind eye because of that and dehumanize her. And it becomes almost like win at any cost. We have to beat the Republicans, so we're going to look the other way and act like a rape didn't happen. That is damaging for the person who's doing that. The person turning a blind eye and loses their humanity. And I'm not doing that. I'm not saying that just to defend Republicans, but just say that the cost of doing that is not worth any sort of perceived benefit. You're sacrificing the very things that we need to use to help keep us alive.
You had figures like Kyle Kalinske, a leftist pundit, talk about like how he thought that this was from the Israel lobby, was doing this to try to discredit Graham Platner, and was just one.
Let me walk you through the absolute worst smear campaign of all time and how it backfired spectacularly in a way that may be the biggest failure.
I used to watch Kyle Kalinske, but
literally. Okay.
more recently
so first,
I felt
let me start with this.
less comfortable doing
of
so.
exactly what happened here with the attack on Graham Platner
because of stuff
from
like
the New York
this.
Times, from the Israel lobby, okay? To recap, Dem and Rep operatives spent the week setting the narrative that Graham Platner is a predator. Pro-Israel New York Times runs a story on Graham Platner, done by a pro-Israel reporter, literally. She got an APAC award in college, by the way, okay? No SA allegations, none. They talked to 6 exes, 3 say he was fine. 2 of the remainder say he drank and womanized. The last is a conservative activist who protects.
Like, just to pause real quick, the whole point is spend the week setting the narrative that Graham Platner is a predator. That's already kind of been established by the fact that he has a Nazi tattoo and he worked for Blackwater and he brags about killing brown people overseas. He's already a predator. But and this is something a point of criticism towards Western audiences, they can't conceptualize that he's a predator, especially within establishment politics, unless a white woman is involved. And when it comes to white women who want to talk about this kind of thing, to empathize with Palestinians and Platner's other victims around the world, we often get discredited because we're white when recognizing, well, no shit, he's a predator, not just because of the tattoo and his service in Blackwater, but because a victim of rape, a survivor of rape, can spot a predator. It becomes quite easy. And Platner wasn't really making it that hard, to be honest. So just something to keep in mind.
Did Brett Kavanaugh literally worked for the Heritage Foundation? That's the Project 2025 people, okay? Republican insider who on the record said she wants to campaign for Collins and attacks Graham Platner with all these absurd claims, quite frankly. Okay, they continue here. She claims Platner trapped her in a room.
This is basically straight out of a Gothic novel where there are many instances where a woman is abused by a man and then basically testifying to that abuse afterwards, and people don't believe her. And this goes all the way back to the Cassandra complex, where Apollo abuses Cassandra and then curses her afterwards with people not believing her. She has the ability, the gift of foresight that abuse often gives. It's a common theme in Greek myth. You also see it with Medusa, and this idea of vision that's supplied post-rape in ways that mark you for future punishment because people don't believe you. What? Platner trapped you in a room? That's ridiculous. As if he hasn't done that to hundreds of other people. But white women occupy this really unfortunate position where they're seen as privileged enough that, well, you enjoy this privilege, so if you speak out to challenge that, then you must be lying. And people like Kyle Kalinske will poo-poo you and say, well, you're crazy, you're hysterical. But then oppressed people elsewhere will do that too and say, well, you're a white woman. So it's not just Kyle Kalinske and white straight guys with beards. There's an oppressed element, which we'll get to when we read my piece at the end.
New York Times reads her diaries, texts, Google chats, and Facebook messages. Nothing corroborates her story. That's an important point. So, zero evidence. Republican operative attacking a Democrat who's leading to take a Republican seat.
Like, again, it doesn't matter. Like, just because there isn't evidence per se, I mean, oftentimes there isn't evidence of these things. How do you prove that someone trapped you in a room? Like, if you don't have a camera, what are you supposed to, like, film it or find some way to basically make a record of it? Oftentimes, this kind of abuse happens in ways where the only thing that you have is your word. So, regardless of what she said, like, yeah, it's entirely possible that she could have been motivated to do this or that for political reasons. But even if that were true, it doesn't change the fact that it could still have happened and probably did, because women don't tend to lie about being raped. It's a very small percentage. So even if she had political motivations, it doesn't change the fact that, while now she's certainly vindicated, right? Because someone else more credible, they're both women. And regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you could be Eva Braun. It wouldn't matter. You could still be abused by a man. Not that I'm defending Eva Braun per se, but I'm just saying for the sake of hyperbole and argument that, all right, women don't tend to lie about this kind of thing, but men tend to downplay it and say that they're lying to try and win at establishment politics, which is a rigged game that abuses people by design by upholding capitalism. So Kyle Kulinski, to try and win at establishment politics, is lying to basically contribute to rape culture.
Zero evidence for any of the claims. Okay, more. New York Times finds a text from the accuser saying she, quote, would personally campaign for Susan Collins. This is the most obvious Zionist smear campaign in history.
But she could still be a rape victim. Like, again, just say that, like, look, like, the problem here is that he's denying the rape.
The GOP attack on Platner failed. What are you, fucking stupid? How desperate are these people? No, what happened was, and I actually know from some behind-the-scenes sources who were close to this, what happened was you had this pro-Israel reporter who was desperate to take down Graham Platner. By the way, the same so-called reporter also did a number of hit jobs on Zoran Mamdani.
And I want to say that it's entirely possible for someone to be a Zionist and be raped. Trad wives get raped. If you serve the status quo, tokens get spent. So that can all be true. And you can say that even, like, look, it's possible that this abuse occurred and still call the person out for being a Zionist. Like, that's doable. Again, what the white straight guy with a beard is doing is denying that the rape happened at all, which is not a good thing, because if they're willing to do it with this person, they're willing to pick and choose who they decide was raped or not. Judge, jury, and executioner believe some women. And that's a big problem, because then you're not actually combating rape culture. You're not combating patriarchy. You're not combating that vis-a-vis capitalism and imperialism more broadly as it affects other women and people who are raped more broadly around the world. It's a huge blind spot.
That should tell you something, okay? So this person was steering the story, told this Republican operative that, oh yeah, no, we have like a bunch of people and they're making SA allegations against him, so we should definitely put yours in there, and you tell us your story and we'll put that in there. And so they overpromised and underdelivered. There were no SA allegations. They never existed. It's bullshit.
I mean, there may not have been SA allegations per se in that given case, but again, Platner acting sus in different ways that, again, trapping a woman in a room, you know, and doing, I mean, that just what I read in the tweet, but, you know, different allegations against Platner that, again, it doesn't have to just be like SA per se. It can involve different forms of power abuse that tie to someone. And again, in this kind of case, rape ranking and power abuse more broadly. It doesn't just have to be like a penetrative act. It doesn't have to be, in the case of this Republican woman who was accusing him of this or that through the New York Times. Like, again, if you're willing to overlook that and jump through hoops to basically apologize for what's going on, then don't be surprised if you can't see the forest for the trees when it comes to allegations of rape coming from a more credible source. Oh, you're basically waiting for someone to tell you the obvious. And it gets very selective, it gets very hypocritical. And this kind of thing is something that it's the reason that a lot of people don't come out and talk about their abuse, because they get subjected to stuff like this. The woman who was talking about Platner, the Republican woman, was abused, but it didn't meet the standard of abuse that Kyle deemed worthy enough to investigate, and he goes through all of this effort to basically discredit her. Now, to be fair, she works for the Republicans, and he works for the Democrats, or thereabouts, and you can't really be surprised if someone in a position like that behaves in a team-like fashion. And that's something that survivors of abuse have to keep in mind. Who are you telling? How are they going to respond? Someone in establishment politics is going to treat rape like a hand grenade, something that you can use against other people.
They literally ran with allegations that had zero evidence from a Republican hack. If they had any fucking whispers of SA, they would have had them bitches front and center, and the headline would have said, Graham Platner accused of sexual assault. This is all I need to see to know she's a lying hack with a very clear political move. And all the Republicans are sitting there, and they're turning into the woke 1.0 ones who are like, believe all women? Even pro-Kavanaugh Heritage Foundation, Project 2025 activists who are professional liars who have a history of lying? I thought you guys wanted to believe all women.
Someone can lie about one thing and tell the truth about something else. Oftentimes liars mix lies with truth. The problem is that, calling a rape accusation a lie is, again, something that is a deeply problematic thing. Like, I would be, even with Republican women, I wouldn't be like, well, you're lying about that, and make it like your knee-jerk response where you're overreacting the way that Kyle is here. Like, again, this isn't just him saying, oh, I don't believe you. He's making a show of it.
And Democrats are there like, fuck you, suck my nuts from the back. She's a lying bitch. Own it. It's a fact. Everybody knows it.
Of numerous attempts to try and discredit Graham Platner and destroy his political platform. And you had people like even over at the Majority Report doing similar things of like, oh, this is just a political attempt to try to discredit Platner.
Right. Except
Hearing that automatically got me pissed off. There has been so much grace given to this fucking man, Graham Platner, for months now. Right from I think the most obvious example of this is when it was discovered that he had a Nazi tattoo on his chest. And he said, oh, I didn't know what it was when I got it, and it doesn't speak to who I am or who I am now. And it's just like, the dude got a fucking Nazi tattoo. And regardless of when he understood what it was, it speaks to the fact that, like, he was not aware of these issues, he was not thinking about it, and frankly was clearly lying about when he learned that this was true. And people were constantly ready to dismiss that and say, oh yeah, we're fine, we can ignore that. So many pundits were doing that because he spoke the language that they wanted, that he spoke the leftist points that they wanted. So they're like, oh, ignore that, ignore these things.
It's okay, everyone. He's a white, straight guy with a beard, so he gets a pass. The pass system is one that if you're white, straight, male, with a beard, you look like an authority figure. You look like someone who's kind of tough, kind of smart, speak with a big, strong voice. You get a pass, quite literally.
And when that happened, it spoke automatically to me to how often so many people are willing to give grace to people like Graham Platner because they say the right things. Men like Graham Platner, these sort of strong, buff dudes who sort of have the aesthetic of this strong man that so many leftists still want.
Yeah, exactly. Like from Marx to Stalin, you go from like the intellectual side of things to the might makes right sort of approach. Like in either case, there's this sexist, queerphobic side of socialism even. Forget American establishment politics. If you look at socialism more broadly in its practice, there's plenty of bigotry because it's extant. It's endemic within the system that they're trying to change, and it impacts the people who are calling for change. And that's just sort of the reality. But you see that rearing its ugly head in conversations like this.
As their leader, this sort of like normalized masculinity as their leader, willing to dismiss and give him all the grace in the world for those things. To me, as a leftist, the work that we do is not to just, we need to win elections. We need to be speaking on class issues about, like, getting people, money and all of these things, and supporting people. Those are all very, very important. But a deeply important part of our work is making sure we are coalition building and that we are actually listening to the numerous different people who are affected in different ways through elements of class, race, gender.
Exactly, yes. I mean, that's something I talk about myself. Intersectional solidarity, consciousness, awareness, and teamwork to raise emotional intelligence, gothic intelligence, being aware of popular media tropes tied to intersections of class, culture, and race that make people less prone to apologize for harm, to look the other way. We can't scapegoat capital. We can't say it's acceptable for us to look the other way this one time. And it gets very exhausting where you have white straight guys within socialism, for example, or establishment politics on the American side of things, that are more than willing to reduce things to class and establishment politics and say that everything else is just hysterics.
Sexuality, all of these things together. And we are constantly told over and over and over again to not look at issues of, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia in these figures that fit the aesthetic of who we want, normally typically strongman dudes, so that we can get behind them because they're speaking to, the class element of this. We are constantly told that class is the most overriding factor, when to me, no.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Over and over, critiquing Marxist Leninism and constantly hearing a class is everything, and elements of gender, elements of culture more broadly, racism will get trumped by white straight guys with beards who are basically saying, well, class, which is the main thing that we're struggling with, surprise, surprise, that's the most important thing. And anything else that doesn't affect them directly, but don't worry, they'll protect you, they ask you to ignore. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm a woman. I'm a sex worker. And despite the fact that I have racial privilege, I don't have male privilege. I don't have cis privilege as a trans woman. And I experience a variety of things, including rape, in ways where I want to empathize with other people and relate to them accordingly. We shouldn't reduce things to just one facet of struggle. Intersectional problems require intersectional solutions.
The work is looking at how class is affected by all of these different economic, racial, gendered, and so many other factors. It's important to look at them in totality, and yet we're constantly told to ignore them, to
a holistic approach,
not listen to them, to downplay them in order to get the aesthetic of the strongman guy and give the strongman guy endless grace to be able to deal with these things. And
it's a preservation of the status quo. You can't critique the straight white guy with a beard. Then masculinity would be in crisis. Whiteness would be in crisis. Capitalist realism suddenly comes into effect, and they will defend that image. It's so common for people in these situations. You find out what they really care about when they start defending these different reflections of themselves, essentially, instead of appealing with other people who were abused by the obvious abuser. They defend the image of what they want the world to be. It's a very colonizer mentality. And you see it among white straight guys, but also token parties as well.
And so when the allegations by Lindsay came out, so many pundits were quick and ready to say, oh, bitch be lying, this must be just a political op against him. It just spoke to me to how little women's voices are valued in these spaces, how quickly women are dismissed and looked down upon. Victims' voices are quickly dismissed, and people will find ways to belittle them, to not pay attention to them, to try to dismiss them in any way, shape, or form, instead of treating them with the respect that they deserve. And look,
I will say that if you're a token woman and you work for the opposing party, I would not expect the Democrats to treat me well if I were a Republican woman, or to expect like sympathy or pity from people who are normally on like the receiving end of these policies. But at the same time, me personally, I'll empathize with a rape victim to a degree. I'll be like, look, okay, I believe you. You were raped, but also you're Republican. You're a dumbass. But those are like two separate things. I can do both of those things. But what I would never do is deny that someone was raped. That goes against everything that I stand for, all the work that I do. And any attempt to try and intersect with others and, sort of get them to understand, like, look, honey, you don't have to stay with the person who's abusing you. Like, they're not protecting you. And oftentimes there's nothing you can do in that situation but wait for someone to figure it out. You can tell them over and over, but until they come to that realization themselves, there's nothing you can do. And yet, if you ignore them when they're actually trying to tell their side of the story that they were abused, the worst thing you can do is deny what they're saying.
Get it. She's a Republican. She's a conservative. And Republicans and conservatives can go fuck themselves in our day and age. But it's also important to look at what she was saying and look at what it speaks to about Graham Platner as a person, because all the warning signs about him dismissing and treating women this way, right to the fucking Nazi tattoo, and his ways he looks down at minorities, and many other folks, were there from the beginning. The warning signs were not missable by anyone who was actually paying a fucking attention.
And not only that, not just Platner, but what he represents, the system at large. He was basically a representative where they narrowed down and omitted all of the people that might actually challenge the system, and they picked another white straight guy with a beard. He represents capitalism in small, essentially. The state is white, straight, and male, often has a beard. And the amount of grace that he was getting is the same degree of apologetics that are afforded to the state at large. Oh, there's no way he could have done that. Impossible. Abusers often come from the home, come from people within the community, those who enjoy the usual privileges. So Platner is a wonderful place to recognize where all of this is happening, the way that it transpires, which is to say, he said, she said.
But so much of our political punditry, and I'll just be frank, mostly cis white straight dudes, though not exclusively them, because patriarchy and all of these racism, all of these things are not only upheld by cis white straight dudes who are the main primary benefactors of this, but teaches us all to police it. But certainly those were the main pundits constantly downplaying these factors. And it was only when recently Jenny Rasico came forward to Politico to report that she was sexually assaulted and raped by Graham Platner. He came over to her house uninvited and raped her against her will, spent the night, like she was literally worried that she was pregnant because of what happened.
It's worth noting that, for context, that they were friends. They knew each other. In fact, they were dating on and off, and he showed up out of the blue and raped her, blackout drunk. So he was someone that she knew, again, from within the community, a trusted friend, friends with benefits, on and off, occasional partner, what do you call that? A situationship. And so that's really important to keep in mind with Platner, is that oftentimes people who rape us are those we know. And again, there isn't necessarily any kind of logic to it other than the arbitrariness that abuse affords under these unequal conditions. My mother had a friend when she was younger. They had been dating for a certain period of time, just like Platner, on and off for a year or two, thereabouts. My mother was homeless at the time. And this person, a black man, my mom was in a situation where she didn't have any friends as a homeless white girl, and he let her stay at his place. They dated on and off for about a year, and he seemed like a relatively okay guy. He never abused her. And then one day, out of the blue, he just decided willy-nilly, well, I want to have sex. My mom said, I don't want to. And he forced her to have sex with him, despite the fact that she said no repeatedly. So it's a very similar situation here, except it's even worse because Platner is a white straight guy with privilege who's being elected to, trying to be elected to the position of senator. So, like, this kind of thing shows that the more privilege you have, the more that these things get covered up. Can you imagine what would happen if Platner was black and people found out that he had a Nazi tattoo? If he was a woman with a Nazi tattoo, they would have been ousted from the race far sooner. And it sadly took something like this for people to wake up, and not necessarily for even the most noble of reasons. Again, they make exceptions for white women when those white women are raped by men. And then suddenly people are like, oh, okay, what you call the perfect victim. And that unto itself is also worthy of critique, I would argue. But it doesn't change the fact that the kind of abuse that Platner did to this woman is frighteningly common, including the denial of it afterwards by other people.
That people were like, oh, he needs to step down. Only then, when it was someone on our political side who had clear, documented, long history and proof of these allegations, reported on by Politico, that people were finally ready to listen to all of the warning signs. And it just angered me that it came to that fucking point to be able to do it. We constantly give all this grace to men like him until we have so much documented information to be able to say, oh, no, he actually is this horrible piece of shit.
Men are essentially the chosen heroes. White straight men are the chosen heroes, the rescuers, and white women are the perfect victims. Missing white girl syndrome, that kind of thing. So the moment a white girl is raped, that's a bridge too far, beyond the pale, if you will. But everything else up until that point reflects the reality of capital, where so many exceptions are willing to be made because that's how capital works, because capital relies on frontier violence at home and abroad, because you can have someone being abused in a red line neighborhood, for instance. You can have racial minorities, indigenous populations in segregated reservations that happen all the time. The school to prison pipeline. There's all kinds of things like that happening. So again, I don't want to keep stressing this because, I basically said it repeatedly now, but just that these kinds of exceptions are things that we have to keep in mind to be able to predict and understand how people are going to respond. Furthermore, what we need to address when trying to move the discourse in a better direction by discussing these things openly and honestly, applying criticism.
And it speaks to how much women and marginalized people constantly have to just have all of our I's and T's dotted just to get listened to get heard by these folks. And even
then, it only happens if we're critiquing the people that they want us to. If you're critiquing someone that they care about, a friend of theirs, someone that matters to them, which will become relevant when I talk about the Cavernacle or Bad Empanada, people like that who are like important members of the community, they're not Graham Platner. They're not an establishment politician. They're doing the God's work. Oh, you could never critique someone like that. That kind of thing is automatically going to be like an off switch. So the moment that you can dot all your T's, or dot all your I's, cross all your T's, have as much evidence as you want. But if you're critiquing someone's hero, it just doesn't matter.
And then I heard so many political pundits after these allegations in the past few days being like, oh yeah, okay, I'm glad that like now he needs to step down, and never once apologizing or always couching their apologies in the environment they created for it being difficult for women like Jenny to come forward. Jenny even said in the Politico reporting that she had difficulty stepping forward about these allegations because she agreed with Graham's politics and didn't want to hurt those politics, but not liking him as a person. And that atmosphere was created because of people constantly downplaying and dismissing marginalized voices and women's voices and many other voices.
Where they feel like they're in a position that they have to put their eggs in that basket. They have to put their trust in a man, because if they try and critique him, they'll be condemned, and they feel like they don't have the power to do it themselves. And that doesn't just happen with conservative women. It also happens with liberal women who are, moderately conservative. But centrists, liberals more broadly, often feel like you can't go after a man. To accuse a man of rape, someone like Platner, for all intents and purposes, he was still a celebrity despite all the things that he did. People didn't care. So I understand the trepidation, and I understand while this person wasn't a trad wife per se, as a rape survivor, their hesitance, but also their desire to put their faith in Platner despite what he did. It speaks to the unfortunate position that liberal women find themselves in, just like conservative women. Women more broadly are often denied power.
And it speaks to how much people are like, oh, we'll do anything for our guy because he says the right words, instead of going out and trying to find a person who will actually stand up for the values as a person, not just as a punditry voice.
A sock puppet.
And again, meeting the aesthetic of the strong man guy that we want to have, rather than actually standing up for, listening to cross-sectional, actually intersectional, actually grassroots organizing that is required for actual leftist organizing. And it makes me so fucking angry, this sexist, disgusting atmosphere that we are constantly building. And it showcases to me this important thing that I'm working on a few videos over my main channel for, of how we really need to be looking much more deeply at how ingrained patriarchy and racism are within leftist discourse.
There's an essay that I just watched John the Duncan summarize in a video of his, The Hidden Roots of Neoliberal Fascism, Race, Gender, and the Intensification of Neoliberal Hegemony, where John, summarizing his work in Cain Aspinall's, talks about the mechanism of the state alongside patriarchy and racism, and understanding how fascism sort of takes root within the soil more broadly. Rape culture, in other words, is incredibly important. You have to understand how they intersect, because that's how they exist. That's how they operate.
Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all of these things are ingrained deeply even within leftist spaces. We tend to try and say like, oh,
yes, it's endemic. Sexism, I get told all the time, Marxist-Leninists care about the liberation of women, but don't you dare do sex work. And I'm apparently just a man in a dress. So yeah, it's oftentimes I describe it as a conservative in red paint. They call themselves one thing, but they're bad actors.
oh, we're above these things. And we won't actually do the internal work to look at where these things actually come out of, are ingrained in our space. Again, I said this earlier, but so much of discourse within leftist sphere is like, there's no warfare but class warfare. That's the only thing that's important.
No, I say ass war is class war, right? Liberating sex work through sex work, which, is a social act unto itself through the performance of sex, public nudism, Gothic poetics, what I call Ludo-Gothic BDSM. So anyone who reduces things to class has to overlook rape, has to overlook this abuse, but they do it while playing the hero and the victim, because apparently if you criticize them, then they clutch pearls.
Read our Karl Marx, and we're only going to be talking about class warfare. But if you actually look at the history, capitalism is not the end-all be-all evil of exploitation and control works. Before capitalism existed, settler colonialism existed, the slave trade existed, patriarchy existed. All of these things built...
Well, and I would argue that these things kind of evolved side by side. So capitalism by the 1400s, the late 1400s into the 1500s, was already sort of transitioning out of feudalism in response to the Black Death and the development of settler colonialism in England, for instance, during the 1600s. Systemic racism was already well established at that point. So, but mercantile capitalism out of feudalism into the rise of the bourgeoisie and the Enlightenment, all of these things were kind of happening at the same time. So I would say that, settler colonialism is something that was developed as capital was sort of maturing into a more crystallized form. Not to nitpick, but, just something to keep in mind. They're not, and you're right, though, colonialism and imperialism in older city-state forms before the formation of the nation-state as we think of it in a modern sense certainly existed, and racism existed, generally through a fear of the barbarian, and the oldest labor struggle, the oldest profession being prostitution, shouldn't we be listening to these horrors that are constantly downplayed or people treated like whores? If you talk about rape, you're a whore. You're someone to deny. You're someone to treat like you're an imposter, a femme fatale. Even if those things became much more popular later in defense of capitalism from the 1800s onwards, essentially femme forte, femme fatale, monstrous feminine, these things have existed since antiquity.
Up on top of each other. And we can get rid of capitalism, but if we don't get rid of the fundamental ways in which those systems build themselves up through racialization, through gender, through patriarchy, they will be created in some way, other shape, or form. It's why I'll get so angry with people being like, let me praise like the Soviet Union and Russia.
No, we were illegal for the entirety of their existence. Like, I'm not praising them. No, they were basically a follow-up to the Russian Empire, and being built on that and being basically inheritors of Rome, the czars, the petit bourgeois structure of the Soviets was incredibly bigoted in fascist ways, enacting similar policies to Hitler.
And being like, look, this is a communist state that we like should be aiming for, without looking at the ways in which that Soviet Russian state also fell back on patriarchal norms, also fell out on racialization.
Yeah, absolutely. Often through exclusion, often by basically incentivizing women to have more kids, taking away the various concessions that they offered early on. You know, first one's free, and then suddenly, oh, it's harder to get married, abortions are illegal, prostitution and sex work are illegal, trans people are criminal. Um, there's just various things like that that they did in ways reflective of how states operate normally, exploit women, queer people, people of color.
And political control and state control throughout their history. We need to be looking at how these things are rooted deeply within our discourse.
And not just in Soviet Russia, obviously in China, in America, all of the superpowers, but also smaller nations as well. The state is straight, white, male, patriarchal, out from antiquity into the present state and time, and also from antiquity in other places as well. India, China, and older empires that more often than not tended to be patriarchal.
And we won't look at the ways in which misogyny constantly gets expressed. Or, you know, as much as I have complicated feelings about Hassan, I'm not hating on Hassan totally. I think he's done a lot of good. But if you look at a lot of the ways Hassan conducts himself online, he has been constantly criticized by Black people, by women, for the ways in which he has talked about our topics.
Trans people as well, basically speaking for us and using that as content. And it's important to remember with Hassan, he's a total dude bro back in the day, and basically still is. I consider him to be like an establishment LARPer, someone who came from extensive privilege and used that to basically present himself as the voice for other oppressed parties. The pedagogy of the oppressed is something that he would talk over to make money while already having it. And some of the earliest content that he had on YouTube was incredibly frat boy at best.
I myself criticized him several years ago when it came to Hogwarts Legacy and how he said, oh, I want to play the Hogwarts Legacy game to raise money for trans people. And I and several other trans people were saying like, hey, don't play the Turf Wizard game to support trans people. That's not how you support trans people. It's still giving attention, money, and political cachet to a woman who is actually using her money to harm trans people, as we have very clearly seen borne out in the laws that have changed in the UK that were directly helped funded by J.K. Rowling. But when Hassan and other people like talked about wanting to play Hogwarts Legacy because it was part of their childhood, it was trans people who constantly got vilified and talked over and harassed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had not just Hassan, a Turkish American, but there was the Birdman, where I was critiquing him for his own moderacy and refusal to critique J.K. Rowling, and him saying, oh, well, people on the left, translation, trans people in particular, are speaking out against Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, and that will never die. It's too big to fail. And how dare you, essentially, and getting really angry when I would call them out for their moderacy. Hassan's the same way. And because these white straight guy with a beard extends to just being a guy, a straight guy, who is defending the status quo in ways that often tokenize. From someone like Hassan, who's Turkish, he's an immigrant, essentially, as opposed to someone like the Birdman, who's racially token. But oftentimes the people who face this oppression are punched down against and discredited by those who care more about a piece of media, some form of status quo material, or a social condition than they do the harm being caused and listening to the people most immediately affected by it.
For speaking up about these issues. And we are constantly dismissed and looked down upon and harassed, and we're told the ones to shut up and get in line. And so many people say, like, oh, that's just centrists who do that. It's not real leftists.
No, no, trust me, it's not that simple. Plenty of leftists or nominal leftists do that kind of thing. And it's important to recognize too the language of left and right operates in a imperialist vein historically in ways that prioritize Western imperialism in the global North over the global South, which is why I don't call myself a leftist. I call myself an anarcho-communist in defense of all workers across the world vis-a-vis Patel and Moore's world ecology. I approach it from a position of sex work, but the idea is emancipatory liberation, like for all peoples and all peoples from capital. And that requires critiquing socialism. And wouldn't you know it, socialism doesn't like being critiqued, especially by those they deem inferior by virtue of the moment you speak out as a woman against a man, a white straight man with a beard, you get treated like a whore. They pimp you. Even if they're like, oh, we're not doing this, just be quiet. But they're basically functioning like a pimp in that situation. And that happens in socialism all the time. It's not that the idea of developing communism is a bad thing, but that the movement historically is full of bad actors.
Who do that. It's just centrists who are saying, like, get behind Gavin Newsom. You know, we got to get behind Gavin Newsom and vote for him to get Trump out of office. And yes, that is a dynamic that centrists do a lot of the time, is like, hey, trans people, shut up, get in line. We're the ones that really support you. We're not going to actually support you demonstrably, but get in line behind us because you need to vote for our guy.
And you see that with token white homosexual men, Stephen Fry, and other people like that, who, facing oppression themselves, basically, once they get in, there's a pick me sort of thing, and then a made it vibe, and then they turn right back around. And when trans people say, hey, can we have our rights now? Can I has cheeseburger? And they're like, nope, shut up, be quiet, it'll happen later. It's incrementalism, which is a classic neoliberal thing that gentrifies and decays into fascism.
Yes, that is a dynamic that happens with centrists, but it happens within leftist spheres too, over and over and over and over and over again. We saw it with like the stuff with J.K. Rowling, and now we're seeing here with Graham Platner of how so many people were so quick and ready to dismiss any and all issues that were clear warning signs about this man over and over and over again, to be able to say, like, look, this is the guy that we need to go for, and like constantly dismissing that because he fit the aesthetic of what they wanted. They wanted a Joe Rogan for the left, like strongman dude, instead of actually someone who will stand up for these values.
An infiltrator, essentially. Whereas in the UK, the dominant strain of fascism in our times, as described by Judith Butler, is the Church-style fascism, the charge of neoliberalism decaying into fascism from Thatcher to Blairites like J.K. Rowling and those who follow her, women first and foremost, the decay of the suffragette movement and second wave feminism in punching down against trans people, scapegoating them under those conditions there. In America, Christofascism, the infiltration of, and the function of electoral politics having an infiltrating factor where they're trying to slip someone past us who, for all intents and purposes, is not disguised especially well. It's just the white straight guy. But there's still an element of deception, but it's largely a naked disguise. The Nazi tattoo was front and center. The fact that he was a mercenary was front and center. The one thing that wasn't front and center was his sexual assault allegations that were brought forward later, but there was still plenty of abuse, rape that he had committed overseas, especially if you examine it through the lens that I provide, which is power abuse more broadly in ways that rape the land, in ways that take power away from people to cause them harm. Prison guards rape victims all the time, even if it's not just overtly in a sexual way. It's just an abuse of power, where you have power, total power over someone else, their life, their livelihood, their mind, and you control every aspect of their life deliberately to cause them harm and control them as an asset of capital. It's chattel slavery for people of color and savage peoples to develop for indigenous populations and women to domesticate and tame when it comes to white women, for example.
And it makes me so angry. And what makes me even angrier is still to this day, we find, like, even after these allegations have come out, even after Graham Platner has stepped down from the race, you still find leftists, people within the political left. I'm using leftist as an overriding term. I know there's a lot of nuances with it, so please roll with me here. Again, I know I'm rambling a little bit on this and not being as precise as I should, but
It's fine. It doesn't matter. This is you telling your truth in this situation. It's not about being concise. It's about making yourself heard. And I hear you and I see you.
like, you still see leftists constantly finding ways to dismiss and downplay the allegations. For example, Ryan Grimm, who is a progressive host of the Breaking Points show, he was posting on Twitter, or X if you still want to call it that, on Twitter about complaining about how Politico didn't report on a text message where Jenny Rasico said, she texted him and said she needed a glute massage, and him complaining is like, oh, well, they should have reported on this. And my thing is, why would they need to report that she texted Graham Platner that night that she needed a glute massage?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like it doesn't really matter, right? He raped her.
As if that would matter in any way, shape, or form to the fact that she was raped. And you want to know why this is such a sticking point for Ryan? I'm not inside his head, but it speaks to this dynamic that I constantly see over and over again with stories of sexual assault. It's these things of like, well, she was leading him on. She was giving him signals,
What was she wearing?
like, oh, because she said, I want a glute massage, which is a normal thing for someone to say. I have texted people being like, man, I need a fucking massage. I'm so fucking stressed.
I guess I've never been asked to give someone a glute massage because I'm like, well, is that an actual massage or do you want me to fuck you in the ass? Like, is it like with that kind of thing? Usually, if someone said they wanted a glute massage or a pussy massage, and I'm sure there are masseuses out there who would say, oh, that's an actual thing, but I'm not used to approaching it like that. But even if she was coming on to him, let's say she was just naked, she's like, come over and fuck me. And he's like, okay. Well, then he comes over and she's like, actually, I'm not feeling it. No. It wouldn't matter what she said beforehand. The moment she says no, that boundary is in place. And if you violate it, that's rape.
People taking that as like, oh, well, that was a sign that she was giving him. And of course, Graham Platner might have taken it that way because according to the chain of events, she sent that message and Graham Platner then read that and went over to her house, broke into her house essentially because her door was unlocked, and raped her. And he said he was on his way over and she texted him, do not come over. And that part of the story gets ignored. That text message gets ignored.
Exactly, right? It's like, okay, don't come over. And that can happen, those kind of communications and, communicating, whether it's on the phone or in person, someone can say yes, and then they say no. And then when they say no, you just need to respect that. The defining characteristic of rape is a lack of consent and a failure to respect someone's ability to consent or not. So when no means no. And it's really that simple.
Because we need to focus on the fact that she said she needed a glute massage. It's like, no, she said, do not come over. And also, even if she had said, come on over, I would love a friend here, still would not excuse rape.
Yeah, exactly. It's a form of blaming the whore. Well, she wanted a glute massage. Translation, she's a slut. Ergo, it's just a way to basically assassinate her character. Blame the whore.
We constantly find ways over and over and over again to say, well, she let him on. Oh, the consent was like, I think he could have gotten mixed signals. Of course he
Dubious consent, that kind of thing. And it's like, no, she said no repeatedly on the phone and in person.
might have read it that way. It's like, this is why it's important to have consent be ongoing and enthusiastic. And there
Mhm.
was no consent here, and we constantly ignore the fact that she said, do not come over, but he came over quickly, apparently. So he might not have had time to read the text. Who gives a fuck? He was not invited over. He came in anyways.
Yeah, he showed up unannounced, uninvited, and was drunk. Like, and who does that? Like, I don't understand how people can have sex while drunk, uh, just because that kind of thing ignores your inhibitions. If you're blackout drunk, you're not going to remember anything. You're not going to be able to respond to someone's instructions. A little bit of alcohol can be useful for helping you relax, anal sex, for instance. But insofar as just like all of those things are just completely inappropriate.
But we constantly are finding ways to dismiss and downplay women's point and the fact that women were raped. Constantly finding ways to give excuses to these fucking guys to be like, well, of course he might have been confused. He might not have known. No, there's no confusion here.
Yeah, exactly. There's no boys will be boys is a form of rape apologia. Essentially, this is all rape apologia.
He raped her. Whatever might have been said earlier, none of that is permission.
And that, yeah, absolutely. I agree with like everything that Jesse's saying here. There's no justifying of rape, and rape is something that people will deny just because it's so taboo. So instead of calling it rape, they'll say that wasn't rape, that was consent, that was mixed signals, and this person was leading them on, and or they're a political enemy. And it's like, okay, well, regardless, it's still rape, but so many people will just tie themselves into knots to avoid calling it that just because it's so taboo. And they'll try and act like, well, it's complicated. The same kind of thing that happens with Palestinians. The moment someone starts playing devil's advocate, they start saying, well, it's complicated. They sometimes, quite often, are obfuscating the very simple, cut and dry realities. Someone has complete power in this situation, someone else does it. And the person that doesn't is being abused by the person that does. Michael Brooks describing Israel, the same idea applies with a woman. If she says, no, don't do this, and the other side has all the power in that situation when consent isn't being respected, if consent is respected, generally the person giving consent has the power. The sub has the power. But otherwise, the way it works when consent isn't respected is it's might makes right and patriarchy, that kind of thing. And the moment someone is refusing to respect you and your consent, it's not complicated, it's quite simple.
For him to do what he did. And yet we constantly have built a rape culture culture that still is ingrained within leftist spheres of like, yeah, well, men might have just been fucking confused.
Yeah, they're not confused. They're under the effects of a system whose rape apologia is extant within their minds. It is bad praxis. Matter shapes consciousness. Consciousness, in this case, is rape culture, the superstructure and the base interacting back and forth. Marxist theory, but applying it intersectionally, exposes the flaws that these kinds of people have when they apologize for rape. They make exceptions.
No, there's nothing confusing about it. Even more so, and this is kind of the last point and probably the least of my points to make, but it's certainly one I want to make, is I'm also so fucking angry at the ways in which some people have been still discussing these in infantilizing terms. For example, Kyle Kalinske, sorry to just harp on him specifically, but I've had issues with him for many years, and this is just a breaking point on it. But Kyle Kalinske, in his videos where he announced these allegations from Jenny about Graham Platner, he used the word grape instead of rape in his video.
that Graham Platner was accused of sexual assault. But if you actually read the article, the headline says sexual assault. If you actually read the article, it's very clear that the allegation is not sexual assault, it's rape.
Okay, but those are the same thing. Like,
Okay, there's a few things about this that are extra concerning. The previous allegations were easy to dismiss because it was a literal Heritage Foundation Republican insider who was making the allegations. Also,
like, I guess the argument he's making is like there's sexual assault where there's like a degree of abuse, and in terms of describing like rape in a sexualized way, it's a very overt form, whereas sexual assault, would you describe someone reaching over and grabbing your butt, for instance, as rape, as opposed to just like a single infraction? I guess that's what Kyle is the distinction he's making. But it seems like such a weird thing. You know, it's like one of those actually or weird flex but okay sort of things where they're like, oh, it's not this, it's this. I'm like, okay. That kind of distinction doesn't make you look any better by making it. It makes you seem weird, like you're gatekeeping, you're tone policing, and I don't know. It just seems kind of strange to me. Like that's the last thing that I would do in a situation like that is unless someone was like very clearly misusing the language and saying, well, somebody stuck a stick in my bicycle spokes, so they raped me. No, that's just a prank. But that's not how the language was being used. It was literally a rape allegation, an accusation. It's very different. And so him making this kind of distinction just feels really strange to me. It's like when people say, that's not pedophilia, that's a phebophilia. Oh, okay.
the allegations were effectively, he's a bad boyfriend. This is not that. This is a much more extreme allegation.
And I know the excuse he would give is like, well, I can't use the word rape in my video because my video would get demonetized. I don't fucking care. If you can't speak like a goddamn adult about these issues, then don't speak on it at fucking all. You've clearly shown you do not know how to handle these issues even before this. But we need to speak openly and honestly about what this is and not use euphemistic language like grape to downplay what it is. It's why...
Yeah, there's the algorithm will basically, the appearance of that word, it's, oh, it's to be advertiser friendly. We're protecting people. When point in fact, discussing abuse is treated like blowing the whistle. Happens with me all the time on this platform, which is why I primarily use it just to basically read my work so that people can have a recorded version of me reading it if for the visually challenged. But that's basically, you know, apart from that, I can have react videos and things, but it's hard for me to have a larger channel on here because I talk about rape all the time and I don't want to censor it. I don't want to use some code word. I want to just be able to call it what it is.
I get frustrated by people using the term like unalive for things like suicide. And I get where it comes from in this like ways that our culture and society has tried to censor us talking about these topics and demonetization and all of these things. But we need to stop being afraid of that and just say it openly, because the fact that we have so trained ourselves to try to downplay and use euphemistic language for these things makes it harder for us to discuss these topics openly and with the weight that they deserve.
And to recognize it, people become alienated from rape. It stays in the shadows. It's taboo. And there are different ways you can broach it. The Gothic is a classic, famous example of that. But when it comes right down to it, you have to be able to say the word. You have to be able to speak about it in ways that honor the victims, especially when they're saying that word themselves and you're not trying to mince words with them to give them the floor, but also recognize what they're saying without having to run it through this emulator.
And it pissed me off, especially when you have political pundits like Kyle Kalinske, who is wanting to be seen as a respectable political pundit on these topics, using the word grape in reporting on this instead of the word fucking rape, because it was fucking rape.
And when I hear the word grape, I think of that kids and the whitest kids you know, I think, and the grapist who's going to chain someone to a radiator and then grape them. Like, I don't know. I think it's a word that has a lot of baggage. It feels like it's not just censoring the word. You could say you could say SA, for instance, instead of grape. So I would much rather like, and then Kyle Kolinsky's like, oh, well, it's not SA, it's grape. So instead of using a word that would have been perfectly fine to describe what's happening, he goes and uses something that, in my opinion, is incredibly offensive. It's not just censoring it, it's covering it up in a way that is incredibly poor taste.
Be an adult, use the goddamn term.
Yeah.
Also, in that same clip that I showed just a second ago, he said it was easy to dismiss the allegations and that it was just because he was a bad boyfriend was what she was claiming, which is not what she was claiming. She was claiming that he sexually harassed her. So there's fucking that. But again, easy to dismiss the claims. Just
it doesn't count. It's not worthy of someone's attention unless it's like the worst case scenario. And by then it's just like, well, what are we preventing? If it takes someone getting raped for people to pay attention, you're not actually, the whole point is you're supposed to recognize the warning signs before a rape happens. Otherwise, how are we supposed to prevent it?
Easy. It shouldn't be easy. Pisses me off. And also, speaking of Kyle, one other thing he did in that video was whataboutism, where he said, oh, well, I wished that leftists or people in power would take the genocide of Palestinians as seriously as they do the allegations against Graham Platner.
Are saying, I think Hassan came out and said this too, stick a fork in him, he's done. Final thing is, we'll know the country is in a better place when people react with the same sort of moral outrage and condemnation to arming and funding genocide as they're reacting to this. It honestly drives me crazy that the majority of our elected officials in Washington, D.C., the majority of congresspeople and senators have voted to arm and fund genocide repeatedly, and it barely gets mentioned.
Which pisses me the fuck off because I am tired. I am so tired of leftists using what is happening to Palestinians as a sort of whataboutism to excuse their own fucking actions. I have seen it over and over and over again. And to be very clear, yes, we absolutely should be talking more and openly and endlessly about what is happening to Palestinians. The genocide is fucking disgusting, and America's complicity in helping Israel and doing it is fucking disgusting. And yes, we should be talking about it a lot and over again and repeatedly. It is very important. I want to make sure that that is very clear in what I am saying here.
At the same time, I think that it's perfectly acceptable to be able to talk about rape. Like, you can talk about the rape of white women or the rape of Americans, more broadly, white or otherwise, cis or otherwise, at the same time. And oftentimes, like trying to talk about Platner, I had plenty of people approach me and say, well, you can't talk about your own abuse because the Palestinians take priority. And it's basically using the Palestinians as a shield to prevent talking about rape, which is just another form of harm, another form of genocide regarding women, trans people, in ways that it's political violence. It's genocide according to the definition. And the passing of legislation, of asking these questions that lead to the incarceration of trans people, of having them be targeted by the state aggressively, like, it's intentional, it's deliberate, it's something that, and using the Palestinians and say, oh, we just have to focus on that. You can't talk about rape. You're mothering the waters. That drives me crazy. It's like, no, we can talk about both at the same time. I, as a rape victim, empathize with the Palestinians. I'm the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, Dutch resistance member, not a Jewish man, but still, I grew up with these kinds of stories, and I want to prevent that kind of harm. And if I'm going to come at it from a position of empathy based on my own experiences, those are the experiences I'm bringing to the table. And I've had so many people tell me, oh, you can't do that. You're comparing your abuse to the Palestinians who have it way worse than you. It's rape ranking, basically, is what they're doing. And they're basically using that to prevent me from trying to solidarize as best I can with other oppressed peoples. They act like I can't because I'm from the global north. It's apparently impossible. Unless you're Bad Empanada, apparently, unless you're the Tabernacle or some of these other people. If you're a white straight guy with a beard and you have a position with lots of money and you're a sexist, rape apologetic socialist, then it's okay. But the moment you start speaking out about things that hog the spotlight, then it's a problem. And that fucking drives me absolutely crazy because it hampers the discourse in a way that keeps us from moving forwards unified.
My issue is how so often people bring up that genocide as a whataboutism, as
Mm.
a way to dismiss from the topic at hand, and especially having to introspect themselves, and will also use said genocide to then go and attack other people, to attack
Mhm.
trans people, to attack women, to
Yep.
say, oh, you're actually the fucking problem because you're not
Yep.
focusing just on this because you're talking about your own issues.
Yeah. Why are you talking about your issues? You have it so good. You have a roof over your head. Well, I got news for you. When I was raped, I had a roof over my head during COVID. My abuser controlled every aspect of my life. And I had all of my material needs met, but it was used against me as a weapon to constantly gaslight me. I felt like I was walking on eggshells. They used me for sex. They used me for my labor. They exploited me in every way that they could. They didn't have to hold me down physically. I was someone recovering from previous trauma during COVID that they had total financial control over in our relationship based on an agreement that they broke in bad faith. And what happened to me is still abuse. And to have other people be like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Bombs hurt worse than words. I'm like, what?
And again, this is not to say you can't criticize other creators and people from marginalized groups and how they talk about the genocide. Certainly, I've had issues, for example, with ContraPoints and how she's discussed things, but it is often used as a fucking cudgel to then attack their political opponents
Yep.
instead of actually talking about the genocide on its own terms alongside all these other issues that we also need to be talking about. They're all important.
Right.
And certainly the genocide is one of the most, if not the most pressing issue that we need to be discussing. And I do not want to downplay that, but you don't get to use it as a cudgel to set other people against each other. Again,
And it's not just the genocide of the Palestinians. Trans genocide is a thing. And then there's also systemic racism, which it's kind of semantics at that point, right? When the school to prison pipeline and the exception clause with the 13th Amendment and the exploitation of people of color in red line neighborhoods, police violence, it's like potato at that point. So there's these things that are comparable to genocide in the continuation of rape culture, manifest destiny, and the exploitation of all peoples on Turtle Island. It's and elsewhere around the world. Like that kind of ranking and division is just that. It's division. It's betrayal. It's something that gets in the way of us unifying and fighting together against the ruling class. And the people that lead the charge as far as that division goes commonly are white straight men with beards.
it just creates fraction points instead of actually building up coalitions. One thing does not need to come at the expense of the other, and we need not frame it as such. So when
Preach.
Kyle Kalinske is here being like, well, I hope people would take the genocide as just as important as these sexual assault allegations, like, yes, I wish people would take the genocide as important. It's not what we're talking about right now. And
Yeah. But I would argue that they go hand in hand. Rape is rape, regardless if you're dropping bombs on someone or you're kicking someone out of a home to freeze to death. Like the outcome is the same. It's exploitation. So it's like two sides of the same coin. And if you want to stress one side over the other, that should be totally fine. And to do otherwise, in this weird kind of myopic cubism where you can only look at like, oh, it's just this, and you ignore every other side of the die, like Kyle does, and other people like him do. Yeah, no, I agree with 100 fucking percent.
to bring it up in this context ultimately does a disservice to both fucking things. And it's disgusting that you would do so. Because ultimately what this is doing is bringing up the understandable rage and anger and disgust that people in your audience have towards what is happening to the Palestinians, and using it as a way to heighten emotions in this video topic and redirect it away from the topic at hand, and which ultimately diminishes not only the topic at hand, but also the need to discuss the Palestinian genocide on its own terms. It is wielding the genocide as your own personal political football and emotional button to use to incite your audience, rather than allowing it to be a thing that we discuss on its own terms, for its own meaning, for how gross and disgusting it is on its own terms to the Palestinian people.
Jesse, you're fucking spitting bars tonight. Like, yeah, no, this is Yeah, this is again, I don't disagree with any of this, honestly. If I'm nodding a lot, it's just because, like, yeah.
Instead, you're using it for your own fucking self. If I'm being very frank, this is the core essential issue that has made it very difficult for me to be creative and to be an online content creator over the past few years. I will be very frank. I have been not disillusioned with the left or with, being a leftist. Like, anyone who ever thinks like I'm going to become a liberal or, go like join the right at any point and go fuck themselves, it's never something I would do. If anything, I've become more and more of a leftist.
Join us.
I'm an anarchist till I like going full anarchist, and I get further and further left every fucking day, and
Yeah, fucking oath.
more and more radicalized left. But the thing that has disillusioned me with being a content creator and trying to make content here on YouTube and discussing these topics is the fact that just repeatedly for years now, going back 5, 6, 7 years at this point, how often I have tried my best, and I know I'm not perfect about it, but try my best to talk about intersectional topics and the importance of needing to talk about intersectional topics.
And I want to say that that's how I came across your work. I think originally the first video of yours that I remember was you were critiquing Futurama, specifically Ben-Hur, and just analyzing it like a literary analysis kind of way, but it had like an intersectional lens tied to feminism and various other topics. And I really, really enjoyed that. And from then on, I noticed that intersectionality was super important to you. And I remember specifically the worse that Bad Empanada got, the more he critiqued you as saying identity politics gets in the way of what truly matters, while he seems to be exploiting the global south himself and saying, oh, he's the only one who can do it. Send me money. Fuck Justy Gender for being uh, into identity politics, identity narcissism, and using various slurs like that to paint you as something that you're not, to scapegoat you. Now, that isn't to say that you're above criticism, because no one is, but I distinctly recall repeatedly with you and other trans people online, besides myself, larger channels, you would often be targeted by weird white straight guys who would seem to be on the left. They advertise that on the tin, but then they're basically pimping you to act like, well, nope, you have to listen to me, the white straight guy with a beard. Don't listen to them. They're in identity politics. So I remember seeing that happen with you. And I've critiqued you before, specifically that video of yours where you said Israel isn't fascism, it's worse. And in hindsight, thinking about it, fascism is a symptom of capitalism, where fascism takes root within. So, to steelman your argument, I could understand what you were trying to go for and to say, look, this is neoliberalism. It doesn't just reduce to the decay. It's a part of a larger body that we have to acknowledge as sick with fascism. So even then, I can think of ways to understand what you are trying to say. And despite the fact that, I've critiqued you about small things, I always valued how intersectional you were because, girl, I'm the same way.
On this platform, and how much that has led to me to be harassed, downplayed, and dismissed. When I talk about trans issues, when I make people uncomfortable, when I say don't play Hogwarts Legacy because it supports the turf, I get harassed, I get yelled at, I get to be portrayed as the villain over and over and over again. And it's leftists and folks not wanting to sit with their discomfort, not wanting to do any internal reckoning with themselves, not want to do any introspection, and shoving it out on the people who are telling them it's a problem. I'm doing a video over on my main channel about the movie Obsession and how so many people are calling the movie Obsession misogynistic. Leftist
Really?
folks particularly are calling Obsession the movie misogynistic, which is wild to me because the reason they're calling it misogynistic is that it's depicting a misogynistic character. And certainly I will talk about in the video like elements of that movie that get things right, get things wrong. There's certainly a lot to discuss. But I had so many men telling women who say they felt seen by that movie, that they're wrong and that they should see the movie as misogynistic.
Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss.
Because it portrayed misogyny. And it's like, no, this movie has things to say and discuss. Again, we'll have criticisms of it, but like, there are things in this movie that people are resonating with, especially women who are resonating with, and you don't get to chauvinistically talk over them to say, I'm actually the good fucking feminist. It's like all these people want to be seen as like Joss Whedon or Neil Gaiman before what happened with those folks and be like, I'm the good fucking feminist. I'm one of the good ones. I know how to speak about, you know, women's topics while they chauvinistically talk over the women that they say they're trying to protect.
Exactly. They're protecting these people, or so they say, in bad faith. And, oh, you don't want to listen to that. That's misogynistic. Listen to me. Instead of like thinking for yourself, you know. And when I saw Obsession, I loved it. I thought it was great. It was basically Matthew Lewis as the monk, and the hero of the film is the woman. But she gets to be like bad in the movie. Freaky Nikki basically tortures the nice guy to death. And I thought it was great.
And the same thing happens with trans issues constantly. I've had it repeatedly over and over again, not just trans issues, but like, you know, I remember talking about like how we as leftists need to listen to people of color, listen to black folks, especially who are educated and know how to talk about these topics, about like how black women are being killed by the police and such like that. And I being told by mostly white folks that I needed to shut up and like, oh, I was, you know, trying to, you know, like turn leftists to make leftists infighting. It's like, you know what causes the leftist infighting? You ignoring people of color, you ignoring, you know, people who are trying to build coalitions with you, who are actually trying to fight for their own issues and to be heard, and you dismissing and downplaying them.
Yeah. Fucking oath.
And part of the work for leftists is to make ourselves uncomfortable and find places where there are tension points between different communities and coalitions, because there's always going to be, and actually try to navigate them, talk about them, instead of saying, no, we shouldn't talk about them, shut up, get in line.
Because basically, as Martin Luther King said, an absence of tension or negative justice as opposed to positive justice, and shut up and get in line is in pursuit of negative justice. The idea that there's an order to socialism, and the people at the top are white straight guys. Those who are accustomed to having positions of power within socialism don't want to surrender power to others who are trying to distribute power more evenly across different oppressed groups.
Because there's always going to be friction, and our jobs is to deal with these friction points, to figure out what those fractures are. Because if we don't, then they can be used against us. It's the same thing we saw with like turf discourse against trans people. The big friction point that so many people, that like so many right-wing folks use is like, oh, it's cis women versus trans women. Trans rights is somehow infringing upon quote unquote women's rights, by which they mean usually cis white women's rights.
Biological women.
And that is not the case. Trans women's rights do not in any way override cis women's rights. In fact, our struggles are quite often aligned, even if they...
Yeah, they overlap. It's the same basic idea. It's autonomy at the end of the day. It's basic human rights. Even if per module they apply slightly differently, the basic concept of having them is the same.
They aren't exactly the same. Fights for bodily autonomy, while trans women are not necessarily fighting for, you know, reproductive rights.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't have a uterus. I can't have kids. But at the same time, I would never, the fact that I'm trying to have HRT, for instance, doesn't infringe on people with uteruses to decide to keep those uteruses or use them however they want. Like, these aren't mutually exclusive things, but TERFs say that all the time.
Because we can't like have babies, it certainly matters to our, you know, NB and trans man members of the trans community, as well as also just speaks to bodily autonomy that is wielded against trans women and trans people generally speaking. So a fight for reproductive rights is a fight for trans people and trans women, even though trans women don't necessarily have, you know, need access for abortions. It's still about bodily autonomy. These things.
Yeah, exactly. And even if it's not something that applies to them, they can still use their voice to speak to those for whom it does apply to. That's how intersectional solidarity works. I'm not black. I'm not indigenous. My partner, Bay Ryan, is non-white and indigenous, Irish Mali, and I can still use my voice to speak out regarding issues that affect them that don't affect me. That's what being selfless is all about. We stand together and we fight for each other.
things are together and they overlap instead of being against each other. But the fact that we don't talk about those things as often, we tend to frame trans women as like this separate thing, separate from other people, as like its own unique thing instead of something that is we should be looking at the connection points over.
Exactly. It's something that you can alienate it, you can treat it as an exception, you can prepare it for ritual sacrifice. It's a form of scapegoating. Oh, that's the exception. Ergo, if something happens, it enters the state of exception, it can be killed without ceremony. It's the zombie in the zombie apocalypse. It's the demon during the demonic invasion. Something you can sequester and then silence and destroy.
Is what allows conservatives and right-wing folks to build that fraction point, to create that talking point.
And not just overtly conservative or right-wing people, but right-wing tendencies within liberalism and socialism more broadly. I often describe Stalin and company as being fascist because they gentrified and decayed a movement that led to fascist policies, policies that were no different in function to Hitler's. The burning down of Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexuality in Germany, followed by the purging of Weimar, the same, a year after that, in 1934, Stalin and company made queer people illegal, a law that would stay in effect for the entirety of the Soviet Union's existence. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's austerity, it's fascist. It's fascist in ways that the state upheld. And you could say, well, call it authoritarian. It's not fascist. And it's like, I'm going to call it fascist. Okay. You know what I mean? And yeah, so being able to call out fascist behaviors within left-leaning circles that used, oh, I'm a leftist, I'm a socialist, I care about you as a shield, to then betray you, stab you in the back, it's Darwin obscurantism. Right?
Of, oh, trans women, we need to, like, you see Gavin Newsom saying this shit where he's like, oh, well, we need to find ways to like support trans people without it overriding women's rights. Like, no, those two things don't override each other.
Exactly.
They are actually interlocked. And the same goes for so many things. And yes, there will be friction and tension points. We need to fucking talk about them. But if we don't talk about them, we dismiss them, we say, shut the fuck up and get in line because we need to follow our guy over and over and over again until we get...
Follow the leader, a fascist idea, and a refusal to acknowledge weak points within a structure is only going to lead to that structure falling apart.
People like Graham fucking Platner, it allows the harm to keep going and will set us on a course to never actually break out of the issues that we are constantly mired in.
It's not just capitalist realism. Basically anything outside of the status quo is anathema. It's also socialist realism, which becomes stuck in this idea of a leader to follow in ways that really aren't any different in terms of those in the West. Chairman Mao, Stalin. Mao was a tremendous womanizer who abused his power to sleep with peasant women and coerce them into sex repeatedly, over and over. He was a giant man whore. Say nothing of the Great Leap Forward, like I can talk about that, and the fact that he was a womanizer at the same time. It's just the power imbalance was too great with someone like that. And then there's Stalin and everything that he did, from the Holodomor famine that he had a hand in, to the making illegal of queer people, to the purges, and so on and so forth. Like, people like that are easy to critique because they've done so much awful shit. But those are the people that socialists, the weird ones that make all these rape apologetic arguments, are trying to emulate. And they do it on the ground floor while punching down through rape apologia by denying people the right to talk about something that's taboo. They're forcing the testimony of rape victims underground, women or otherwise.
Constantly. And again, it's why I get disillusioned. It's why I, at the end of the day, I just been, being frank, just been struggling.
No, I get it. I see you, because I have days where I lose heart, especially with the climate catastrophe, state shift, various things that affect people that I love and care about. elsewhere in the world that I have a deep connection with, that it's difficult for me to find a way of imagining that we'll be able to see each other because of climate change, but also fascism walking arm in arm with that because capital neoliberalism is in crisis. It's always in crisis, but it's decaying and it's set to decay. And it's easy to feel disillusioned. But I love fighting. I love helping people. And I do that from a position of privilege. And no matter how many people tell me that I'm crazy, that I'm fun to point fingers at and laugh at, I'll still do it because I love having friends. I love helping people. And I love standing up against bullies.
As a creator the past few years. Because I just sort of am like, how do I can't keep saying this over and over and over again. Many people may know I haven't talked as much directly about trans topics. I've certainly talked about trans perspectives, but not talked about trans topics over on my main channel in a while, because it's just like, I've been saying this shit for like 5-6 years. And, you know, I would start writing a video, and then I just realized I've written this video before. The names may be different. I may be talking about a different politician or a different figure, but I've talked about this issue before.
I get it. It's exhausting. I found myself leaning into building community on the ground and focusing on positive things and connections as opposed to like proving that people are bad actors. I've been writing about that for so long, and it's going to do us much more in the long run, I think, to build these connections that we'll need when the fight comes to us more than it already has. So instead of me just doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, even if it's noble, even if it's important, I think it's constructive, more constructive. Like I can point out abusers and things like that. I can teach people those skills so that they can do it themselves, and I don't have to keep doing it on a case-by-case basis. But I'm focusing more and more on doing stuff like I fund sex workers, I archive the work that they do, I give them a platform that can't just be taken down. I fund the security for that, the infrastructure, but then on top of that, I also make friends. The trans community in Michigan, despite the conservative elements that exist around us in the state, is something that I'm joining and doing more work on the ground. But I understand what drove me to do that, the same way that you feel disillusioned with there's only so much you can do on the internet. Sooner or later, the revolution won't be televised. It's not that you can't accomplish things on the internet and that song spoke to censorship, but as much fighting and resistance goes not through essays, but praxis. And that happens on and off the internet, but especially off the internet, where the enemy cannot see us doing the work that we do, organizing, preparing to fight back from the shadows.
No one listened to it then. Now it's worse, and still not listening to it. And I just, not that I don't think it's not important to talk about these topics, we should, but I just find it difficult increasingly on YouTube as a platform and online spaces as a platform to have these discussions.
Yeah, I especially in regards to, I've written 10 books on this subject, and I always get the same responses. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not a real scholar. Your work doesn't count. You're not a real woman. What does that have to do with anything? And it's coming from people who claim to be my allies. And sooner or later, I'm like, okay, the time has come for me to seek greener pastures. I still do work on here intermittently, sparingly, but I pick my battles. And I focus on things that are more important, that I think are going to yield better results, working among people who aren't just going to discredit and discount me at face value.
And it's become even more and more so over the past year or so, as I look at like right-wing discourse has increased on this platform, and the response usually has been to the increase in right-wing talking points online to be like, well, we need to fight back, so shut up and get in line. And it just creates this toxic us versus them discourse instead of the more important thing, which is to have internal leftist discourse on how we navigate these things. And I know I focused particularly on Kyle Kalinske in this video, and he is certainly not the only example of this problem within the online discourse sphere, but he is one that I particularly find frustrating because he has been called out for this before. Recently, like for example, FD Signifier talked about in one of his own personal videos how Kyle discussed racial issues and how that clearly was a blind spot for Kyle. And, you know, that discourse cycle ultimately went pretty well because Kyle responded to the criticism and accepted it and listened to it. And I do appreciate that level of like willing to have some level of introspection on his part. But I also wonder how much that was because of A, the way in which FD Signifier delivered it, and B, also the fact that FD Signifier is a man with a huge platform,
a straight man at that,
who Kyle respects. Certainly, I don't think me with
a peer,
a much smaller platform than FD, and certainly saying things in a much more angry and incendiary way will be heard by any way, shape, or form. And again, people will be like, well, why didn't you say it nicer? I'm sure I'm going to get some bullshit in the comments for the anger that I am expressing here. But the anger that
no, I get angry. You got to get mad, right? And no, it's like, and the people that tell you not to get angry are tone policing. You know, it's a form of pimping. Oh, angry, hysterical woman, shut up. Go listen to the man. We know better. When obviously, how's that working out, everyone? Is the world going in a better direction because of that?
I'm expressing is, I think, fully justified, and yet it will be used as a way to dismiss me, to belittle me, and to not listen to me. And there's a part of me that's like, maybe I shouldn't release this video in this state as a result of that. But I also feel like, no, this is an anger that needs to be expressed because I'm feeling it, and I know so many others, and yet we are constantly told to.
I think it's refreshing. I like this side of you. It feels very honest. And I'm not saying that you were dishonest in the past, but just like seeing you pissed off, it's like, yeah, I like this angry side of you. The radical Jesse. Yeah, go for it.
Eat it, swallow it, and try to deliver our criticisms in nice, easy terms. And I have been doing that for years and years and years and years. And whenever I say something that makes people even a little bit uncomfortable, that steps outside the bounds of that nice, like, oh, let me give you my criticisms in a way that is easy for you to like digest and make you the least amount of uncomfortable as I possibly can. If I ever step out of that, then I get harassed as well. And so it's why I just get so particularly frustrated, especially even with the FD Signifier discourse. And I want to be clear, I love FD. He's great. I adore him. He's a friend. So I'm not criticizing him by any means.
Should be able to criticize your friends. But I know what you're saying. Compared to a lot of the other people that I've critiqued online, FD, for all intents and purposes, my criticisms of him are relatively minor. And compared to someone like Bad Empanada, who's calling black Marxist-Leninist Zog slave, a term that comes from the Turner Diaries. You're not just going to learn that term anywhere. And the kinds of people who use that language unironically, or just in general, really, it's such a myopic, specific term. And the people that defend Bad Empanada, in turn, like the Cavernacle, there's all this weird hostility towards FD as a black man, who, again, isn't beyond reproach, but usually if he's wrong, I've critiqued him in regards to obsession and using dubious consent to talk about rape in that film. Not a super fan of how he talked about that kind of stuff. But again, people are holistic and you can critique them through various aspects of themselves to try and reach a broader understanding. And by and large, FD is relatively okay. Is he perfect? No. But compared to people like the Cavernacle, Bad Empanada, Hassan Piker, a lot of white straight guys with beards, he's relatively okay.
But it is one of those things where I'm just like, yeah, like, you know, we constantly have to give this like, oh, let me deliver this information to you in the nicest, easiest way possible for you to get it. And even then you still don't get it because it's clearly evidence Kyle's still going on his bullshit and not taking the time to actually do the learning, but just addressing it when it becomes a criticism and people who he respects say it. And
yeah, he's not being proactive about it. He's not actually internalizing the lesson. He's just doing it to please other people. And then as soon as people forget or they look the other way, then he's just, like you said, back on his bullshit. He's not changing.
take the hit then and have it be like, look how civil we can be, without actually doing the work to try to change things in the long term. I actually want to read a quote from activist and feminist scholar Bernice Johnson Reagan, not that Reagan, that I think is really important, we need to hear right now. So I'm just going to read it out loud to you. Coalition work is not work done in your home. Coalition work has to be done in the streets, and you shouldn't look for comfort. Some people will come to a coalition and they rate the success of the coalition on whether or not they feel good when they get there. They're not looking for a coalition, they're looking for a home. They're looking for a bottle with some milk in it and a nipple, which does not happen in a coalition. If we are earnestly trying to make a better world, you should not be trying to make yourself fully and completely comfortable.
Well, even going back to Marx, just to use kind of like a ironic example, Marx, warts and all, was able to say there has to be sacrifice, there has to be struggle. Mirroring something like Frederick Douglass, you have to be able to subject yourself to uphill battles to be able to fight for something better by denying yourselves the comforts of empire, essentially. So if Marx can do that, we need to be able to take that lesson, what's a positive thing that he said, and run with it. It's absolutely, comfort is something, cheap food, cheap housing. As the world gets worse, these things will be offered up as a means of armed subservience. Defend home, it's under attack by what the bourgeoisie caused. And we have to be able to stand outside of what they offer to resist cheap trinkets, to fight for the prize.
That's the problem we get into. People are made discomforted, and then they only seek to return back to the norm of when they were comfortable. It happens over and over and over again. So many issues were talked about for many, many years, but now they're only being discussed because Trump's in power, and now people who were ignoring it are finally feeling the discomfort, and so now they're actually trying to fight back. Now they're actually going out and doing things, but all they're fighting for is for just to get comfortable again.
An absence of tension is what they're seeking.
And we need people to feel more comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because you know who's uncomfortable every fucking day? Marginalized people, trans people, uncomfortable every fucking day. Black people, uncomfortable every single day. Women, often uncomfortable every single day, especially marginalized women and folks. Trans men, non-binary people. We are uncomfortable every single day in our mere existence in this world. We have to sit with it every fucking day. And yet the people who are allowed to be more comfortable in their positions just seek to return back to comfort. And it's like, no. Make yourself uncomfortable. Be okay with introspecting. My goal whenever I point out issues like this is not to say, hey, you're a bad fucking person for talking about things this way. Like, I have issues with fucking Kyle Kalinske and the Majority Report and other folks for how they're handling Graham Platner. I am angry at them, but my goal at the end of the day is not to be, you're a bad person. Go fuck off into the sun. My goal is actually sit and introspect and learn how to do fucking better.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I need from you. I don't need you to just go dis-a-fucking-peer. I would, there's some people I would, like Trump and folks, to just go disappear in the fucking sun. I hope Mitch McConnell's fucking dead, by the way. That's an aside. Waiting for that announcement any fucking day now. But, at the end of the day, it's not useful to me. What I want people to do is fucking grow up, be uncomfortable, and be okay with being uncomfortable, introspect, and learn and try to grow.
Yeah, exactly. As a Gothicist, living within confusion as a state that is all around us because of capital operating as normal, we have to be able to navigate, as you call it, fracture points, stress points, to identify where there's smoke, where there's fire, and be able to work accordingly. You have to acclimate to chaos, to long and hard is the way that out of hell leads up to light. Better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. Again, you have to become comfortable with the idea that the state will see you as an enemy, because otherwise nothing will ever get done.
And this Graham Platner stuff just is the latest example of it, but certainly not the only one, and one that I just had so much anger and needed to express. All right, I know this was rambly, so I'm going to wrap out. Thank you so much. Please take care of yourselves. I won't apologize for the anger. Thank you for listening to my anger. I will say that. And again, I hope you all, my friends, truly live long and prosper.
It reminds me of Spock. I think it was Star Trek 4, where the Federation says, oh, you have to come back and do this or that. And nobody on board the Enterprise wants to do that. And then Spock says, I think the proper response to tell them is they can go to hell. And so seeing you pissed off kind of gives me that kind of feeling. And I don't know, it's very refreshing. I appreciate this side of you, the work that you're doing, the fact that you have reflected in ways where you're utilizing your anger as a weapon against the enemy while also helping us organize, asking other people to do better, asking other people to reflect who need to, in order for people to come together and fight the real enemy, which is the state, not trans women, not the Palestinians, and any other marginality under the sun. So thank you for making this, Jesse. I apologize on my end for the length at which I talk, and this is probably going to be a very long video, and I hope it's not too long. I hope that you find the feedback useful, and solidarity. I really mean that with every fiber of my being. As promised at the end of this video, I am now going to read the afterthoughts for white straight guys with beards. Afterthoughts are Heroines and Villains, a Gothic approach to intersectionality when exposing state predation. And this is something that I think is germane to what Jesse is talking about. Whether or not you think so, you be the judge, but I'm going to read this just top to bottom and then close out the video. Having covered the exposing of Gothic villains feeding hypocritically mid-crisis, i.e. bad actors tied to rape, specifically systemic abuse, I want to give a short takeaway on intersectionality, solidarity, aka tactical unity, alongside consciousness, one touching on state vampirism as inherently barbaric and rapacious, but also alien, something for the heroine to expose, which male characters in those stories classically don't. In fact, capital is such a massive system, and one designed to conceal itself through its operatives, who hide and feed through privilege and bad faith, that workers can't tackle the problem in whole. They must do so in part, selecting smaller pieces to highlight the structure mid-predation. The fragments jump around in highly quantum ways. Think of a hot potato, one to pass around concerning hard things to pin down or face. Confronted, its outwardly dark presence raises worrisome questions, essentially The Walking Dead or comparable things, i.e., Marx's vampiric dead labor, speaking as much to people as the factories that house them, a vampiric chain feeding on nature as alien. So often there's a veil, and it's black and person-shaped. But what does it mean? It means capital, a system of predation always in crisis working through nature, whose conspicuous decay and looming presence of disorder denotes an ongoing cycle or transfer of power from older to newer rulers. Capital without pause and without end rapes nature as alien mid-contradiction, e.g. sex bad, sex sells. Gothic stories tackle said rape to expose it, meaning those who cause and or perpetrate it, enablers which aren't discrete from overt abuse. This classically happens from inside the house, a Roman simulacrum laden with external fears pointing the finger elsewhere. The foreign plot, aka barbarian at the gate, speaking to enemies within, Darvo and obscurantism. Capital scapegoats the proxy, whose rape includes genocide to maximize profit, generally called development. But survivors can't scapegoat capital like the old novels tried to. And yet the language survives in ways that, in the proper hands, expose the predatory system behind those bad actors. So we access capital, a giant invisibly vampiric system, through its middlemen, smaller servants that hint at elevated feeders, the ruling class. So cryptonymy's opaqueness speaks to things that, however concentric or occluded, their concealment gives away. To it in dealing with transphobia in the anti-Zionist movement, I approach this in the usual Gothic style, investigation from within, peeling the onion through an updated approach. Gothic gay anarcho-communism breaks capitalist realism, cryptonomy, and objection, whose dialectic of the alien shifts material and social conditions away from state predation. I'm a Gothic heroine of sorts, one who reveals systemic predation through quarrels with mimetic vanguards, the hidden pirate, bastard, or imposter. This means I'm constantly facing Gothic villains who play the savior in bad faith, doing so on a shared stage, often white straight men in positions of authority that beards and or diplomas commonly announce, once home in peril, and whose parallel occupants double a status quo refrain that gaslights, gatekeeps, girl bosses, the whistleblower. Here the very planet suffers a deeply confusing event, owing to its size in relation to capital feeding on through its workers, and one whose frankly overwhelming nature Gothic poetic's usual shorthand neatly codes and captures. Or as Patel and Moore write, real abstractions both describe the world and make it. That's why real abstractions are often invisible, and why we use ideas like world ecology to challenge our readers into seeing nature and society as hidden forms of violence. These are undetonated words. Real abstractions aren't innocent. They reflect the inner sex of the powerful and license them to organize the world. Source: A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things. Gothic is perfect for this, fostering unity paradoxically when cutting both ways, and generally regarding nature and civilization at odds, a picturesque ordering of things haunted by predation as counterfeit. Capital is always in crisis, feeding on nature mid-turmoil. What's a girl to do but turn out state pockets? In Gothic, the heroine is classically a white female detective, someone who, step by step, carefully unveils hypocritical theft and rape as happening under wraps, i.e. the villain canonically a bad apple to oust from the system, which they abuse to camouflage themselves and their predation, e.g. the false preacher using the language of the outsider, which aliens are, perceived or otherwise, to distract from his own institutional privilege and predation. We simply remind the audience of a larger connection to the system producing and protecting these men, what Radcliffe calls black penitents, criminals of privilege given stay of execution from inside church walls. My approach remains holistic, Gothic communism critiquing benefactors of genocide to blow the whistle against local darlings, i.e. those best positioned within their community to betray and fleece people less fortunate, which, in the internet age, extends easily to places overseas. By poking and prodding person and process, we might raise empathy and brains, doing so through intersectionality, preventing predation anisotropically, according to direction, namely power and its flow. Capital divides workers with workers to conquer them, and without end. We unify mid-division, doing so from divisive positions that gentrify and decay labor, i.e. fascism makes you dumb. Through capital's boom or bust and concentric framework, such undead cannibalism oscillates mid-peristalsis to an endless swallowing of embarrassing food, eaten alive but born in bigger bellies, ourselves as the land around us, part and parcel. To reclaim one is to reclaim the other, divided through two-way imitative practices. So whilst our focus here remains on white straight men with beards who appear unassuming and innocent above, it also includes those they hypocritically dupe in bad faith. Anyone can be the scapegoat, can wear the beard in duality having no set function. Oppression, though, mustn't monopolize, weaponize for state predation, and all that entails. This includes obviously hostile examples, the openly wolf-like predator conducting imperialism in mask-off ways. It also means the fox, R.E. Malcolm X, i.e. those who wear concentric smiling disguises that all the better to eat you with facilitate genocide with more steps. Capital rapes by design under state models, imperialism what Lenin called the highest stage, and something that decays, by that logic, into fascism when imperialism comes home to empire. To prevent a reslicing of the pie, at home and abroad, we must critique allies in good faith, all while recognizing that intersectional problems and their solutions require a holistic approach, one whose subsequent awareness and teamwork, while outing imposters by outmaneuvering them through our own disguises, the beard being a classic queer disguise, allows for universal emancipation from a broader pick-and-choose cannibalism, smaller stomachs and bigger ones that see the food punching up collectively to escape. Escape equals transformation, not exit. That means no scapegoats, including the tragic homeless child, e.g. blaming whores for their own rape, or otherwise condemning them for using their survival to empathize with other victims under capital, their oppression burrowed into privilege. Roughly half the world's population are women, for example, which state power is marginalized, then tokenized by giving and taking privilege in Amazonian ways, pimp each other along the usual class, culture, and racial lines. White women police black women, cis women police trans women, etc. That being said, criminogenic conditions don't preclude abuse from minorities under the boot, e.g. Arab cultures who, desperate for aid inside the vice, gradually see their culture's progressive elements swept away, driven underground, or abused on the western side of the fence to pinkwash imperialism during rainbow capitalism, the assimilation fantasy roping feminism, often complicit, into pimp-like roles. Only the reactionary factors at play stay at play, or favor themselves in global discourse, which feed paradoxically into Orientalist tropes, stereotypes, and bad praxis, as furthering imperialism mid-abjection through and elsewhere, both at home and abroad, their placement situational, relative. Blaming the horror comes easy and includes their attempts to blend in below. Inside capital's endless frontiers, RA stomachs, unity is uphill. It takes struggle, meaning honesty and awareness, among workers divided differently by capital's feeding on them through each other. Doing so through manufactured instability and conflict. That's the function, which paradoxically reverses through subversive disguises and demo. Cryptonomy's double operation, savage, barbarian, whore. A state can mark anyone for abuse, including white trans people with or without beards, above. Meanwhile, the racially oppressed can harm those oppressed differently than they are, e.g. your average Arab on the street isn't past reproach or ranking rape when push comes to shove any more than Edward Said or Norm Finkelstein are. Zionism feeds in bad faith regardless, and people are human, thus prone to err. To be anti-Zionist in holistically intersexual ways, meaning those that prevent rape for all, we shouldn't be afraid to critique each other and give positive negative feedback. I.e., we must, if doing so helps foster a better collective understanding, one that fills gaps, knowledge or otherwise. We prevent harm by addressing it, making rape impossible through mirror-like means, i.e. the whore's revenge, mid-abjection, applying cryptonymically to all workers pimped out by capital as sexualizing everything. This prevention takes time, slowly making workers more conscious, prone to work together when undermining a common foe that harms each party differently. That happens mid-oppression as something to overcome on the aegis, to reduce harm in all its forms, including bigoted worldviews that lead to harm matter shapes consciousness, and vice versa. Consciousness can't rise alone. It demands intersection, reflecting harm to open eyes, while capital drives a wedge betwixt allies using the same reflector. A black mirror to feed with and send power up. Mid-predation, under capital's spell from inside a house of mirrors. It's one traitors occupy well chosen from the oppressed, those with more to less oppression seeking assimilation by getting inside, whatever the cost. The trick isn't to break the mirror, as there's too many to exhaust, but reclaim it upon ourselves to break the spell with mirrors. We're in the same boat, you see. One rebellious workers unify versus traitors, where open and veiled equals something that cuts both ways, above. It's an uphill process because workers identify the bourgeoisie through workers, finding and blaming any with relative privilege and or different oppression, a process I call mirror syndrome. They're to blame, even when offering help. If all it takes is to divide us forever being born different, including whatever divisions capital historically manufactures, then unifying workers must happen anyways, i.e., despite those differences, and by using the usual mirrors to reverse polarity. Meanwhile, the conditions that lead to bigotry's rise and blowback brace recipients for generational trauma, i.e., given and received once bitten. Divide and conquer is a waiting game, one seeing outgroup members grow more and more desperate for white saviors, the kind who betray them by undercutting and funneling aid through themselves, i.e., as the sole providers thereof, while punching down at others, usually minorities, who hope to also help. Said groups can even benefit, at least in the short term, from said relief. However, if said aid leads to future rape of one's own and or other groups, all part of a larger whole, then capital isn't being challenged, it's being upheld. Even so, the state, try as they might, cannot monopolize the asymmetrical language of violence, terror, and monsters, i.e., the state its key tools. The latter helps workers in duality release steam to expose abuse, those who, as bad actors, appear within our homes beset by capital's invisible predation. Doing so means recognizing capital as the central problem monsters speak to. Quote, often in visualizations of the spread of capitalism, the image that offers itself is an asteroid impact or the spread of a disease, which starts at ground zero, or patient zero, and metastasizes across the planet. Capitalist frontiers require a more sophisticated science fiction. If capitalism is a disease, then it's one that eats your flesh, and then profits from selling your bones for fertilizer, and then invests that profit to reap the cane harvest, and then sells that harvest to tourists who pay to visit your headstone. But even this description isn't adequate. The frontier works only through connection, fixing its failures by siphoning life from elsewhere. Unquote. Source, 7 Cheap Things, whose above passage Gothic ludology explores at length. By comparison, deliberate failure to voice predation, often by selling out, abusing the language of monsters and saviors, equals betrayal. Betrayal doesn't equal tactical unity, solidarity amid aggressive difference, but suicide, and commonly of a prolonged, unironic, and painfully slow death, the ignominious death in Gothic stories, a hoisting on one's petard. To further or reverse the same happens behind masks, on mirrors, whose confusing liminalities we inhabit in duality. To speak, two ghosts of different kinds, or bandits pretending to be ghosts. The specters of empire and slave, sharing the graveyard in numinous ways. Anyone can betray anyone, the pimp and the whore not clear-cut, i.e. under virgin whore, insider-outsider models abused by capital in Rome's tall shadow. The oldest profession, the oldest struggle, one joining other survivors not to rank, but recognize rape, a hauntology. Model and artists Skyla Seibin and Persephone Vanderwaard. Source, restating my goals before we start, or celebrating satire in Gothic forms from a response to Bridget Empire. I digress. Our aim here is intersectionality at large, its awareness and teamwork amid difference, challenging transphobia from bad actors among anti-Zionism, a mirror to show and reveal different things. On it, two things can be true at once, and capital feeds on different workers differently to uphold state rule. To keep capital flowing smoothly, state actors hijack whatever discussions result, i.e. of the vampire's curse, occurring among workers where no perfect victims exist. Instead, workers take responsibility, not by infantilizing ourselves in cop-like ways, reclaiming our power mid-exploitation, above. This means, despite our degrees of privilege and oppression, workers have more in common with themselves, and whose divisions by owners see them betraying a shared class interest, therefore culture and race intersecting with class, i.e. liberation for all people from capital, state predation, and its realism. Gothic villains lie, rape and steal in bad faith. Gothic heroines expose them, and the systems they serve, by facing the complications that result. This unmasking navigates confusion, sometimes undercover, but always in enemy territory overlapping with home, e.g. that someone can be both right and wrong at once, and how marginalized peoples don't monopolize oppression, i.e. any more than bad actors treating them like human shields with mirror-like qualities adorned with useful corpses, so workers move against their own interests and values by acting bigoted while being duped. weaponizing oppression of themselves and others to self-serve and uphold capital at oppressed people's expense, who hoist on their own petards when taking the bait, the cake is a lie. To betray one is to betray all. The token colonizer is still a colonizer, ergo Gothic villain, when all's said and done. To conclude, assimilation is poor stewardship, and betrayal takes many forms, hiding cannibalism, a concealed violence dressed up as mere consumption, i.e. reactionaries and moderates that include tokenized saviors leading, if not paving, the road to hell. Ari the Cavernacle, a seemingly cheery Irishman who, regardless of intent, hypocritically weaponizes brown oppression, doing so to defend fascism and apologize for genocide within anti-Zionism. He simply hides it better than most, appearing safe and normal, but still lying through his teeth and bearing false gifts. All to protect a decidedly awful man like Bad Empanada, us fascism at large. Regardless of form, you don't fight fascism with fascism and genocide with genocide. You come together and expose bad actors, capital and small. Vampires of the state sort. They feed behind upon mirrors, confusing predator and prey, the vampire's reflection actually the victims they imitate. Exposing them and the lie they share isn't clean. It's messy and happens inside empire, a place of feeding and lies, where exposing predation violates a commonplace idea of friend, as given, and generally mid-crisis when capital dies, revives, and digs into everything around it, a root-like metaphor used by others, e.g. Kian Aspinall and John the Duncan's The Hidden Roots of Neoliberal Fascism. So capital feeds in all directions, kicking up dust, when binging and purging to conceal its own farm, food source, what Aspinall and Duncan call soil, which vampires use to rest and digest, would also conceal ongoing predation. To shock the system and transform it, we must boldly poke and prod whatever's needed to till the soil, turning it over. Only then can workers free themselves from planetary bondage, uniting efforts across the world to engender a world ecology, as Patel and Moore call it, one that combats state shift inside the capitalist scene, Gothic heroines, regardless of gender, exposing Gothic villains in solidarity.